Today, we are so excited to be talking about sustainability and what actions that you can take with your business and just as an individual. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from, so go ahead and feel free to drop that in the chat. And my name is Maddie Watt. I'm the Senior Manager of People and Programs at the Hive. We, again, have this awesome panel lined up for you today. So excited to be talking all about climate change, sustainability efforts, and we are so lucky and privileged to be hearing from some of the industry experts. So, real quick, how you can interact with our panelists. We love questions. So to ask a question, all you need to do is hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So you're gonna see some buttons down at the bottom, and there's one called Q&A. That's the one I want you guys to press when you have some questions. The reason is if you ask them in the chat, they disappear as more people talk in the chat, and then they disappear, and it's really hard for our panelists to kind of track that. So if I see you ask a question in the chat, know that I'm gonna come after you and hound you to use that Q&A button. So everyone get familiar with that. And then also feel free to chat with attendees and panelists, but just know that you have to keep it respectful, and this is not the time to be recruiting for your startup. So thanks so much for going along with our program on that. And this session is being recorded, and it will be available later on our YouTube channel. That will be sent out to everyone who's on the call, so you can share it with your friends and colleagues. And we love when people follow along on social media. So please go ahead and tag us at Hive Data or use the hashtag Hive Data. And at the very end, I'm going to send out a brief event feedback survey. If you have a minute or two, it's only 5 questions. This helps us tailor our events specifically to your needs, and we can bring you really interesting events that are either on brand with our investing thesis or a little bit out of the box. So we really appreciate hearing your feedback. All right, thank you, Ravi. And then our next slide, I'm just going to tell you guys what the Hive Think Tank does. We are a content and event platform. We're bringing you events every week about right now. During the pandemic, we're doing all virtual. Obviously, I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe right now. And we are bringing events on AI, blockchain, enterprise, industrials, a bunch of other things, including fintech and insurtech, which is relevant for next week. And we also are branching out and doing more things related to our evolving investment thesis, including sustainability and diversity and inclusion efforts. Next slide, Ravi. Just want to do a special shout out and thanks to our sponsors. If you want to get involved with the Hive Think Tank, either to do an event or to sponsor the Hive Think Tank, please contact me. I will drop my email in the chat, and I'll also drop how to sign up with our events, our meetup page. That's where you can find out about everything, as well as our YouTube channel, all that sort of stuff. I'll get you hooked up in the chat here in just a moment. And then next week, special shout out to Avanta, who's one of our sponsors. We are going to be doing an event with them on fraud in 2030. So as you guys know, we're more digital than ever, and there are more opportunities for fraud in the digital space than ever. So how can we protect ourselves, and what can businesses do to stay ahead of the curve? We're going to be joined by some leading insurance and analytics experts, as well as it's going to be moderated by Kamesh Raghavendra, who is the Hive's Chief Product Officer. So he's going to be holding it down for the Hive. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce TM Ravi, the Hive's Managing Director and Founder. Ravi, take it away.
Thank you, Maddie, and thank you for making this happen. So just a brief introduction of the Hive. You heard about the Hive Think Tank from Maddie. It's a thought leadership forum focused on entrepreneurship, technology, and things that concern us on a day-to-day basis, like today's topic, sustainability. And so the Hive is a deep tech and AI-driven firm, venture capital firm, where we are focused on enabling and creating companies that are in the enterprise, general enterprise area and different segments, industrials, financial services, insurance, and life sciences and healthcare. A common thread across all our companies is the use of data and data-related technologies to create opportunities, drive disruption. So we think 10 years from now, there'll be 3 categories of companies: the pure tech companies, which are going to do incredibly well, companies, existing companies that are forward-leaning and embrace data and AI, that are going to be able to transform themselves, and the other category that are going to get disrupted. So we are helping the first and the second. If you are going to be on Twitter today, please use the hashtag HiveData, and appreciate you communicating and chatting about this event. With that, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Mr. Rangaswami. Mr. is the founder of Corporate Eco Forum, and I'll let him say a little bit about what Corporate Eco Forum is when he has a chance. But he's also founder of a number of different entities. In March, the last conference I attended was his Enterprise 100 conference in Half Moon Bay, just before the shutdown. So it's 100 sort of top thinkers in the enterprise space. He does something very similar in the software space. He's the founder of the Sandhill Group, of Indiaspora. With that, if I can welcome Mr. Who will be the moderator of today's event.
Thank you so much, Ravi, and thank you, Maddie, for organizing this event. Really looking forward to a great set of conversations. We have 2 amazing people, but just to give you the backdrop, I had the opportunity to look at doing something new about 13 years ago when I'd sold my previous business, and looked at different opportunities to start a network. And I had 2 young daughters at that time, and I wanted to be a good role model. So one of the areas I looked at was the green space. And early in those days, I talked to about 80 different Fortune 500 executives, one of whom is actually joining us today to start CEF. And the reason for me starting CEF at that time was there were many different ways one could address or tackle the problem of climate change and sustainability. You could be a consumer and you could only buy things that were more sustainable. You could pay Greenpeace to protest. You could do many things to change behavior, or you could be in government and the regulatory environment to put down rules and laws that would improve the climate of countries and sustainability. Or what I chose was a third path, which is to work with large corporations. And that's what CEF consists of, is 70 of the world's largest companies. And we work with their chief sustainability officers to mitigate climate change, to buy more renewable energy, to look at their supply chains, and so on and so forth. This group controls over $4 trillion in combined revenues. So I thought if this group of companies could move the needle a little bit, you know, they're the power of a G7 nation, we could actually move the needle for the entire world so much faster. And that was my thinking before I started CEF. And now I'm so privileged to have 2 of my friends who have taken the CEF journey with me and their own journeys as well. The first one is Roberta Bowman. Roberta was the first chief sustainability officer at Duke Energy, one of the largest utilities in the United States. She had a great career there spanning 25 years. She then retired and went on to do even bigger things. She's now on the board of directors and became the chief brand officer for the LPGA, the women's golf circuit. So we're privileged to have her, and she has been now on the advisory board at CEF because she was a member in our leadership council, but once she transitioned, we were so privileged to have her on our advisory board. The other person joining us today is Rob Swan, and Rob is the founder of 2041. And I was introduced to him many years ago by a dear friend who said, "You've got to meet this crazy guy." And I remember Rob coming to San Francisco wearing shorts, which kind of gave up his background away because nobody wears shorts in San Francisco. And I was very privileged to get an autographed copy of his book, also called 2041, which I highly recommend to all of you. It's his journey of how he managed to walk to the South Pole and to the North Pole. So he's the first And I think the only person to have done that feat. And he's also on the advisory board of CEF, inspiring people, taking people to Antarctica on management and expeditions to show them real world implication of climate change and to become better sustainability leaders. So welcome to both of you. And I want Roberta to first start off. And just, Roberta, give us a background on your journey through Duke and LPGA. And it would be very useful for the audience to know your background.
Sure, thank you so much. And as you heard, whenever MR calls, interesting things happen around that. So I'm delighted to be here. MR, wonderful to see you again. And Robert, I really feel like I'm in the presence of one of the giants in our field and literally royalty in this area. So what a privilege to spend some time with you. I was thinking, gosh, what was MR thinking about bringing someone with the LPGA and Robert Swan together? And indeed, I think our careers are like our signature. They are uniquely our own, and they create the stepping stones for all of our experiences and views. Even though the terrain that I faced from a corporate standpoint was not as unusual as what Robert may have faced in trekking to the North and South Pole. Quite honestly, in the early days of sustainability, it felt just as hostile. MR has heard me tell this story that my mother, as she grew older in life, would always enjoy telling her friends about her children. And if you ever want an exercise in humility, have your 91-year-old mother explain to her friends just what you do as a chief sustainability officer. And I was there one day and she was bragging on me and my brother, my sister, and with the swoop of her hand, she points to me and says, and my daughter, Roberta, well, she is Duke Energy's chief suppository officer. And on certain days, that's kind of what the job felt like way back when. I have to say that the profession has evolved so much since then. And what was at one time a bit of a new profession, broadly misunderstood, has become very much core to corporate success and business strategy. My early career at Duke Energy was all in the external relations space. I was their chief communications officer, chief environmental officer, ran public policy, and it was a wonderful consolidation of experiences and accountabilities that very much set me on the path to this career redirection into sustainability. I took the job as Duke Energy's first chief sustainability officer, not even know what it meant, not knowing whether the company was serious about it. But it really was a wonderful intersection of the things that I am passionate about. The arc of my career has a couple of things in common. I am always attracted to the tough issues that really matter. I have a strong sense of purpose, as I suspect everybody here does today. And quite honestly, I have a soft spot for the underdog issues. I have represented commercial nuclear power. I have dealt with unpopular issues in the workplace. And the irresistible attraction as chief sustainability officer was, how does a company like Duke address climate change? At the time, Duke Energy was the third largest emitter of carbon in the US. And so to MR's point, if I could make just a little bit of a difference there, if this approach to sustainability could matter and even change it by a degree or two, a percent or two, that would be a huge, huge success. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. So 2008 came about and we set about for ourselves an audacious goal. And that is a company that was emitting 109 million tons of CO2 a year had established the aspiration of cutting those emissions in half by 2030. The good news is I checked in with them just last week. they are already at reducing those emissions by 39% and have doubled down on that commitment and have set a goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. And honestly, if you'd asked me if this was ever going to happen, I wouldn't have thought it possible. So I took a bit of an early retirement and found out a lot of things about myself. I don't idle very well. And so I have done a number of things since then to keep me in the sustainability space. I was on the Sustainability Advisory Council for a water company called Xylem. I was on the Sustainability Advisory Board for what is now Train Technologies, used to be Ingersoll Rand. I serve on the board of trustees of Blue Cross of North Carolina, the largest healthcare insurer in the state. Serve on the board of directors of Echo Health Ventures, which is investing in transformational healthcare technologies. And most recently, I joined the board of a company called UPL. UPL is based in Mumbai, India. It is the world's 5th largest agrochemical company in the world and doing some of the most interesting work I've seen in the space of sustainable farmland. It was a pretty full plate, but one of the nonprofit boards that I serve on is the LPGA. And at the time I had rotated off, I'd hit my term limit, the commissioner called and said, I have a job that only you can do. And I was at the stage in life where I never imagined I'd be back in the workforce. But if you remember those drivers around things that matter, things that have a purpose, things that are our underdog, women's professional sports hit all 3 of those. So depending upon who you asked to tell the story, I said no to the job somewhere between 2 and 6 times. And right now I am completing the 2nd year of what I call my accidental career. So there you have it. Again, our career experience is the cumulative impact and learning at all of those steps. And I have to say the opportunity to contribute to sustainable challenges, to move the needle, to make our world more equitable, more sustainable, has been just a terrific learning experience, and that learning continues this afternoon.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Roberta. Now to Robert. I think we're going to confuse you guys. Robert, Roberta, Robert, Roberta. So now it's Rob for you.
Well, thanks very much, Roberta. I'm, honored to follow after you. Wonderful stuff. And I just want to say that people view me as an explorer, but we're in the presence of 2 greats, which is Ravi and MR, who've summited the highest freestanding mountain on the planet, Mount Kilimanjaro. So congratulations to you both. Yes, I'm the first person to have walked to both poles, 900 miles to the south and 700 miles to the north. And on those journeys, I had 3 words that really helped me, because it's very hard. I lost 69 pounds in body weight on one journey to the South Pole. So it was pretty intensive stuff. And those 3 words were, this will end. And actually, I've got that stuck up on my office wall here in relation to our current circumstance here on the planet. It will end. This will end. That always inspired me to keep going. This began for me with a dream at the age of 11. And I was truly inspired by the great explorers and made a commitment to try and become that first person to walk to the North and South Poles. And yes, it began with I, but it ended with we. We did this, not me. We did it as a very small team. And those journeys were hard, they were long. And being my age, I have to say that, way back then, there were no radios, no satellite beacons, there was nothing. We navigated to one building in the center of the Antarctic, the South Pole Station. And remember, Antarctica is twice the size of Australia. We had to use the sun, a sextant and a watch. And if we messed up, we weren't coming home. So on those 2 big journeys to the poles, I did it because it it was history. It went down well with girls at parties. You know, I didn't do this to help save the planet. I did it because I wanted to do it. But on those journeys, I touched a few things that, thank goodness, the likes of MR and Roberta and so many people are trying to address today. I walked under a hole in the ozone layer. My eyes changed color in 70 days, our skin ripped off, and the hole in the ozone was discovered while we were walking underneath it. And that was at the South Pole, and then the North Pole. We walked across a frozen ocean of ice, and the entire ice cap then promptly melted beneath our feet. We damn nearly all drowned. And just as an aside, it's 30 years since we reached the North Pole, and 30 years on, it is now physically impossible to walk to the North Pole because there is no ice. So anybody says that climate change isn't happening, please join me on a swimming expedition now to the North Pole. So I came away from those two big journeys with that feeling that, you know, what was I? It's not a bad thing to have a think about actually in life. And I'm not an explorer, and I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not qualified, and I'm too stupid to be a scientist, by the way. But as MR will tell you, I'm damn good at staying alive. I'm a survivor and good at it. And a survivor does two things. One, they live in hope. You can't be a depressed survivor. You've got to be somebody who looks for hope. And the second thing is that we, as a team, have always relied very much on us being together under very, very difficult circumstances, but at the same time, you don't ignore problems when you see them. So when I'm in Auburn, California, and I'm proud to live in California, and I'm surrounded by smoke and fire, I don't ignore that. So really, two things to end up with. One is that I was given a mission by Jacques Cousteau, which was a 50-year mission. And I'm 30 years into that mission, because in the year 2041, the treaty that preserves Antarctica can stop. And it is my goal in life to make sure we have the sense to leave one place alone on Earth forever as a natural reserve land for science and peace. 20 years to go. We're on it, MR, Roberta, Ravi, the whole team listening. We're going to make sure that happens. And finally, that I believe we owe hope to young people. It's not an easy thing to be a young person growing up in this at this time. So MR, that's the story. Thanks very much for having me on board.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those two introductions. I want to now get into the climate change aspect of things, because this whole session is about how can we take action on climate change as companies, as individuals, as governments, and so forth. So Roberta, how do you view climate change? And we all know it's an existential threat. How do you bring perspective to this and urgency to the situation we have?
Well, I have a different answer today than I would have had a month ago. And one of our folks on the call today, Victoria, her parents live in the same community that I do. I'm participating today from Beaufort County, South Carolina. Well, why do I tell you that? Because recently the New York Times and ProPublica did a rating of all of the counties in the United States, and Beaufort County has the distinction of being the top county in the US at risk for significant change from climate change. We are a coastal community. The risks that they called cumulative catastrophes included very high temperatures and humidity, which would make it very difficult to be outside. There are risks to the crops in this area. And then as a coastal community, of course, the risks of shoreline erosion and just loss of the shoreline there. So what had been a very academic idea to many became very local, very personal. And I think in that, it becomes part of the solution and part of the idea in terms of how do people grasp that climate change isn't something that's decades and decades into the future. All you need to do is look at the wildfires, look at some of the other challenges in our weather patterns, look at the 100-year floods that are happening, not every 100 years, but every year and every 2 years, and embrace the challenge and the urgency that climate change is ours to handle. And to Robert's point, as that mission of providing some hope to the next generation.
Great. Rob, I know you said you couldn't walk back to the North Pole, and that's a significant thing. So how do you view this crisis, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's you know, where I go, it's all ice, and at 33 degrees, the ice stays as a block of ice. At 34, it melts, and so therefore I go to places that are really telling us a lot of things. And for years and years and years, and Roberta, you're so right, for years and years and years, I've been going on about what was happening at the North Pole and the South Pole, and actually now it's happening next door. So I do believe that this has entered our lives. I do believe that one of the benefits of COVID-19 is that people have had the time maybe to look out of the window, maybe to think about these things, maybe, which is incredible, to see how amazing our planet is and how quickly it can recover from some of the things that we've been doing to it. So I don't want it to really feel, MR, with all respect to you, that it's a crisis. I think we've got to move it forward and inspire people, especially through technology, that they can undertake convenient, easy solutions. Press of a mouse and they can make a difference. So I think we've got to move it forward. Yes, it's a crisis, but we've got to move it forward so people don't switch off. People tend to switch off from a crisis because they think they can't do anything.
If I could just add to that, though, Rob, I think your point is absolutely terrific in terms of the analogy of what we've learned from COVID. We've learned a lot. And one other thing that we've learned is this myth of boundaries. And we live in a global world. This notion that either carbon or virus stops at boundaries,
Well said. I
think has been proven to be incorrect. And it's also taught us the value of individual accountability and individual action. So if we can take anything from this 9 months that we've been through as a world, hopefully we can learn from that experience and apply it to climate change and other such challenges.
Great. So the next question I have for both of you is, there are 3 different sectors that can help mitigate this. The biggest one being government. And Roberta, you've dealt with government, being head of government affairs and all those kinds of things. So how do you view government's role, and what do you think governments in general need to do to push this forward in a more dramatic way than we are today?
Yeah, it's a good news, bad news thing. I think it's very difficult to make progress without government leadership here. But government leadership alone won't work. And government that changes regulations, policies, leadership every 2 or 4 years is even more challenging. What government can do, I think, to be most helpful is convene like-minded governments and create regional or global solutions, and then to create the policy and financial framework that investors need to make the decisions, to make the big bets that will either be part of mitigation, adaptation, or innovation.
Rob, your perspective?
I'm not really a government person, Emma. I won't actually describe what I think often about governments, but Roberta's more balanced, and I agree with her. But I do think the most important thing about governments is that they're supposed to be voted in. So I think that anybody should inspire people to vote. You have that opportunity, and I think I rest my case there.
Oh, got it. So the other set of actors and players in this space are large companies. Like I said, at CEF, we have 70 of the largest companies: Amazon, Apple, Disney, Microsoft. UPS, Ford, you have all these big companies who are working towards making the world a better place. So Roberta, what do you think are the sustainable development goals and impetus to them? What's going to make large corporations like you worked at Duke and others, move forward with more urgency and more inspiration and motivation?
Yeah, I think the good news is here that sustainability, climate change, it is now the core business challenge and opportunity that businesses are facing. And I think, again, that's become a learning over the past 10 years. So I think it is now front and center in each business's analysis of risks. Actually, that's why I'm so optimistic. Corporations, particularly multinational corporations, have the ability to do things that government cannot, particularly when they collaborate with some of the NGOs as well. These are boundary spanning entities that have a perspective and an accountability that goes beyond any type of national border. And I have seen example after example of incredible innovation in this space. And it is continuing to attract the best minds and very interesting opportunities for finance and innovation. One thing that I will say, though, is that innovation, corporate progress, all of that is great, but it's not sufficient. It needs to be in that ecosystem of appropriate regulation and appropriate financial rewards and incentives. And if you can bring those three things together, financial rewards, a regulatory policy that is predictable and long-term, I think that business has both the will and the ability to innovate and really make a difference.
Great. And Rob, I know you've worked with large corporations in your journeys to Antarctica to kind of create new products, test products from large companies and such. Can you give us some ideas of what's going on there?
I think what's really important in all of this is never to forget that companies are made up of people. And often I think that big companies, and I'm sure Roberta must have come across this, they can launch a mission on sustainability, but sometimes they allow that mission to drain away. And I think sustainable inspiration is a really good idea to revisit and make sure that the employees of these huge corporations really feel that it's moving ahead, that they have some participation in this. And as things close in on us more and more and more, where climate change is like here, I think that that's really important, not to forget to re-inspire and keep inspiring employees. And I've seen incredible, I mean, I went to the South Pole, just to give you an idea, everybody, went to the South Pole at the end of, beginning of this year, and I was wearing dark glasses that are made from the CO2 that we put up into the atmosphere, the dirt. They sucked the dirt out and made me a magnificent pair of dark glasses. So the technology's there, and I really feel that that's something I'm proud to be on this podcast, this broadcast, because I think that it's technology that's going to really dig us out of these things. And I think finally, I'd like to say that, you know, after the United States withdrew from the Paris climate agreement, I think more action happened through companies because of that. So, you know, I really respect the companies, but Roberta's right, it's not enough. We need to keep forging on. And if we really want companies to do more, we must get their employees to do more.
Yeah. And just for the audience here, please do send us some questions. I have a whole list and I can keep going on for a couple of hours, but would love to hear from all of you. Just use the Q&A box and type in some questions, some provocative, challenging questions to us as well. But let me come to the third sector that can make a huge difference, which are consumers, individuals. You know, what can people do to take action against climate change? Obviously, they can buy green-oriented products or sustainable products. They can boycott certain things. They can protest. So Roberta, what's on your mind, like in your own community in South Carolina, what are people going to do as individuals, to take action?
Yeah, and there are so many good ideas out there and lots of resources. But one of the things that we found quite interesting when I was at Duke was the power of motivation based on your neighbor. And we were seeing how recognizing certain communities and neighbors for their energy efficiency actually lifted up that spirit of community and competition. And obviously, electricity is a big driver of individual carbon footprints. But I think the same idea there is, to personalize and localize the challenge and to be part of a team in that effort as well. Look forward to hearing what Rob has to say. He's traveled these in his treks north and south, and I'm sure has discovered some great ideas as well.
I think that, thanks Roberta, I think that to go into your world or your former world, I think that a lot of people don't realize they can pick up the telephone to their utility and they can actually ask for green energy. And it might cost an extra couple of bucks a week or a month to get that green energy. And obviously it's not going to come from the roof of their house, as everybody knows. It's going to come from a wind or solar installation somewhere in the United States of America. So I think that's a really good way of forcing the pace on the use of renewable energy. I think that everybody, how many times are we all charging our phones? Well, I really try hard, and sometimes it's annoying to people, but I really try and charge my phone off a little solar panel that kind of sits just on my outside my office on the window ledge. So I think having a solar panel somewhere in your life shows leadership. I think that all of us, obviously MR excluded because he's vegetarian, but all of us should think clearly about what we eat and the use of meat and all of that. We all know why, but we need to be on that. And I think finally to have an attitude which is not to say we can offset what we're doing that's wrong, but I think we should have a mindset to say we should clean up the mess that we make. And whether that's planting trees or it's investing in a company, I think that idea of cleaning up is much more, as Roberta said, much more inspirational to people. We've got to have competition, inspiration, hope, action, and make sure it's all quite convenient, otherwise people possibly won't do it.
I neglected to mention that another of the learnings from COVID has been this disruptive change in travel and meetings, if you will, much like we're doing here. I think this is one of those lifestyle changes that would have taken decades to accomplish. In my field with healthcare, the rapid assimilation and popularity of telemedicine would have taken years and years to do, but for this experience. So real-time learning happening everywhere, every day.
Great. We have a question from one of our participants, Angelo. He says, what do you think about the role of government to price carbon on a defined increasing way over the years to provide what Roberta has called a predictable evolution of the regulation that supports investments in innovation?
I like it.
So
I think that predictability, that's what business is after. And again, it provides something to assess alternatives against as well. So I think that's what the US has sadly lacked for a while. And that type of regulatory framework could really drive some additional changes. I will say the biggest driver of Duke's decarbonization was the changed economics and availability of natural gas. But that's an important phenomena. And again, it's just part of the portfolio of fuels that we have available.
Great. We have another question from Pashu. He says, innovation sometimes comes with a huge cost to the environment. how can consumers reconcile innovation and sustainability? And this is a technology question. For example, with 5G, it requires the whole world to ditch 4G phones and move to a 5G phone. Should we always accept more data, faster, etc., even if it requires us to throw away 3 billion devices? Rob?
Don't get me going. You know, I spent a lot of time with young people, as you well know. Your daughter, you know, fantastic. She came to Antarctica, and every year we take young people down there and we have these conversations. And so many of young people are starting to say, look, you know, do we really need some of this stuff? And I just think that it's something that the technology people have got to be thinking about. You know, isn't it possible to have an upgrade that you can plug into your phone that upgrades the thing, but probably not, because people are going to make millions of dollars. Your question is so relevant, and I think that and maybe I'll visit it later in our conversation, but I often feel that we're used by technology. I think we should think about using it for us more. I think that is an issue, and I don't know how fast everything has to be. It's a really difficult question, and the marketing behind all of these things, you know, really gets to people, even gets to me. And you know, I live in the Stone Age, possibly in technology. So yeah, annoying.
Yeah. Any other remarks on this, Roberta?
I think Rob answered it well. I actually come from the world where a cell phone was a new innovation. I'm used to dial-up computers way back when. So I kind of like the speed that we have, but I don't know how fast enough is anymore. And what annoys me is the planful obsolescence that's built into some of the products, and I think that's the unnecessary wastage right there.
Or excuse to interrupt, but you know, maybe those phones could well be used in a country where maybe they're just starting with 4G or 3G or 2G. I think that should be something we all think about rather than just throwing them away. Maybe that we could have a better system to recycle those phones in some way for other use somewhere else.
Great.
I think that could be the first big idea that came out of today's panel.
Yeah. Great idea, Rob. Another question from Heather. You know, the definition of success in capitalism has always been how much money you make, how fast you grow, and so forth. And now organizations like the Business Roundtable have made statements that it's not just profits, it's stakeholders, it's looking at a broader picture. So what is happening in that space, Roberta, as you see it? You know, are companies moving away from the profit motive to more of long-term sustainable stakeholder type capitalism as well?
Yeah, and I feel like, MR, you and I have had the privilege of seeing that happen on a real-time basis. And I think it is driven, as Rob said, by the consumer and by the investor, and by that recognition that corporations at their very best can be real instruments for change. I have to say, had we not been down that path and we experienced this year of questions around social justice and racial inequity, I think we would be in a much more difficult situation in terms of corporations and their relationships with customers. So I'd like to think it's a road of no return, because obviously my view is this much more balanced view that takes in the social and the environmental costs as well as the economic impact is really the only way to honor our environment and the world we live in.
And also, I think we've seen huge amount of interest, Roberta, recently in ESG related investments, large corporations and mutual funds and others paying attention to the environmental and social governance of companies as opposed to just profits. So I think it's starting to happen. I guess it has to happen quicker and hopefully sooner.
And also I feel, MR, Roberta, that a lot of these big, investment people often are quite shy in telling people what they're doing that's right as far as ESG. I mean, we just had a team of people come to Antarctica with us on the ship that we take every year, and it was almost like trying to draw teeth to get them to actually say, yeah, well, we are doing this. And I think the more that people come forward, get their head above the parapet a bit, take some risks on telling people what they're doing that's right, is going to inspire others. To go back to Roberta's point, a bit of competition. Oh, well, they're doing that, they're doing that. I think that's so important. Head above the parapet time, I feel, on ESG.
Great. A question from Victoria. How important of a role do you think infrastructure will play in improving the resiliency of cities affected by climate change? Should we start requiring urban areas to prepare for possible extreme weather events caused by climate change?
Well, I might just punch in on that I'm working with a really interesting team of young people who are designing houses in an entirely different way. And those houses could be in California, but they're trying to actually do them on all continents. And I'm looking forward to testing one of these little buildings in Antarctica. And they've really thought it through as far as wind, fire, and changes. And I think that we need to think that way, not just in the United States of America, but for all new buildings. I think we have to start to think in an entirely different way. And I think that the insurance industry, interesting enough, will probably drive that, because they're going to run out of money if they have to keep on rebuilding half the planet every week.
Yeah, I think Rob said it well. This whole notion of resilient design has got to be one of our disciplines and our competencies going forward. And I'm seeing a lot of innovation in this space, a lot of uses of technology there as well with smart buildings, smart infrastructure. And at least in the US, we still are lagging a bit in terms of modernizing our infrastructure anyway. So, why not cure both the modernization and the climate resilience at the same time?
That's terrific. I know we have a lot of technology entrepreneurs and executives and workers in that space. So what can the tech industry do to help sustainability, to mitigate climate change? Any thoughts, any ideas on the tech community and what role they can play?
I'll start with just one of the industries that I'm involved in, and that's healthcare and healthcare innovation. And I thought working in the water industry was the most fractured industry in the world. I actually think that healthcare and the application of medicine is even more fractured and early in the stages of using good data and data records. There is so much innovation happening there that, again, that's why I'm very excited and optimistic. And it's that marriage of big data and analytics and understanding, human behavior that's making all the difference in the world and resulting in, lives saved, health improved, things of that sort. So I do have that visibility into healthcare innovation. Some of it is high tech, some of it is just living and learning differently. But I think we are still at the early stages of the convergence of technology and big data and healthcare.
I think personally, I probably wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for technology. Earlier 2 years ago, I tried to finish a crossing of the Antarctic continent. It's taken me over 35 years to do this, and my hip disintegrated while I was making that journey, and I came back home and I got a brand new hip and put it in and went back early this year to finish that mission. And only 40 miles from the South Pole, my hip decided to part company again, and it blew out of its socket. And last week I went back and had it all fixed up, and I'm going back to finish that journey to the South Pole next year. Why? Because I said I was going to do it and need to inspire young people to think about what they say and delivering on their words. So I probably wouldn't be sat here if it wasn't for great technology. But I do feel that the technology industry has to understand that it's grabbed the attention of young people. And I advise or suggest that anybody watching should see a short film on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. And it's all about the fact that the telephone and the technology in there has really grabbed the attention of young people. But it seems to be pretty much based on, self-promotion, selfies, all of that stuff. And I think that technology people need to move things forward as they progress and will progress. But I think they have a responsibility to try and put more positive things on sustainability through these devices into the minds of young people, and do that in a cool way, not sort of force it into them. But I think there's a responsibility somewhere there to provide more than just the platforms, but some help possibly with what people can do, especially young people, and give them hope.
No, that's terrific. We have another question here from Sarah. Smallholder farmers produce 3/4 of the world's food, but are heavily impacted by climate change and the escalation of high-tech corporate agriculture that often excludes them. Smallholder farmers are rarely involved in large decision-making and budgeting processes for long-term solutions. Do you think it's important to include small farmers in response to climate change, because they are bulk of the population working on farms?
I can jump in, please. Thanks to you very kindly, MR. I spent 3 years doing 5,000 kilometers on a bicycle around India. I've probably never been the same since, by the way. And on those bike rides that I made, I came across so many of these farmers. And so many of these farmers that if it didn't work out, they couldn't feed their family and people were going to die. I mean, simple as that. And I think it's so important that we work with them, because they are in a survival situation, and that they're open to ideas. They want to make it work. But I don't think, and I'm not just saying in India, I'm saying across the world, that I don't think they're included as much as they should be on these issues. I think they need to be engaged more, pulled in to what they really need.
So I love that question, and I love Rob's answer, because mine is exactly the same. And my big learning from my years of service with UPL is the degree of innovation that's happening there for the small farmer. UPL being based in long history in India, it has enormous respect for the role of the small farmer. And what they are doing is bringing big company infrastructure and services that it makes available to the small farmer, so that the farmers don't feel like their only option is to sell out to larger farms or whatever. Yeah. And that notion of, individual local farm sustainability can be a dream that passes on from generation to generation. I'm enormously impressed with UPL's approach to sustainability. That just being one example where respect for the role of the small farmer, the small farm's role in the whole food chain, and ways to get the best of both big agriculture as well as respecting the role of small agriculture.
Well said.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Rob, I forgot that you did take the bicycle trip in India.
Thanks.
And you were crazy enough to then run the Mumbai Marathon. So dressed
as a tiger, which again was never the same since, because I wore this tiger suit and it was about 45 degrees Celsius. But anyhow, whatever it takes, MR, we need to get people inspired.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I know we're running short on time. So maybe we can close with some final thoughts from each one of you in terms of, how do we take action? Does the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals matter? Do climate change agreements matter? How do you see the next decade playing out in terms of sustainability, and how can people help?
Well, Roberta, you go first, please, because I'm panicking on that question a bit.
Well, I pulled a piece of paper out of my drawer because whenever I talk about sustainability, I have to look to the heavens and remember my good friend Jim Rogers at Duke Energy, who was my boss and visionary. And Jim passed away, almost 2 years now. MR knows that he was honored by Corporate Eco Forum. And Jim had a philosophy, and he called it cathedral thinking. And I think it's a good lesson for all of us in sustainability. And if I can just glance at my notes, because they're so rare and precious to me. Jim loved the architecture of Europe, and he really appreciated that the builders who laid the foundation never saw the beautiful stained glass that would come years later. They never saw the spires that would stretch up to the heavens or hear the cry at the baptismal font. Yet these creators had a vision that was bigger than themselves. And they were the architects, the stonemasons, the clergy and the carpenters, all who shared a common vision and purpose to create a lasting legacy that would inspire others long after they left this earth. Something beautiful and awe-inspiring with the strength to withstand the torrents of time. So how do I end today? Encouraging everybody here to build your own cathedral.
Fantastic.
Wow.
That is beautiful.
How do I follow that?
Yeah.
All I could say really is that, as I said at the beginning, that we are all on a journey. And I do believe the last great exploration left on Earth is actually not some maniac like me walking to the North and South Poles, but the last great exploration left on Earth is for us to survive on Earth. And that the future heroines and heroes of that journey, we need to inspire now. We can't wait. We need to inspire them now that there is hope. Because if people get hopeless, as I said earlier, they just switch off. We can't afford that. So let's inspire with hope, inspire with convenient actions that people can take, and be aware that we need to be relentless more than we've ever been. More than we've ever been, and not back down, and keep pushing forward. So I really feel that, and I've been so honored to be on this panel. Thank you so much, Emma.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. I think a couple of websites, I think 2041.com. You can find a lot more information on Rob's journey. I know, Roberta, if we go to the LPGA site, I'm sure we'll see the great work you continue to do in that space. But I really want to thank you. This has been a truly thoughtful and inspiring session for all of us. And I want to turn this back to Ravi and Maddie.
Imar, thank you for moderating this great discussion with Roberta and Rob. And I think for corporations who are thinking about, to the question about what's beyond profit and revenue growth, this is a kind of a great starter in terms of thinking about it. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks to our amazing panelists, and thank you, MR, for the great moderation, and Rob and Roberta. It was so awesome to hear about your guys' personal experiences and how we can start doing stuff today. So I'm going to wrap up this webinar with you guys. Thank you for joining, and I'm going to get on the phone with my energy provider and switch over to green energy right now. Thank you, guys, and I hope we see you next week.
Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.